welcome back. I did promise in a previous video that I will be talking more about a specific type of Viking ship. And sure enough, I was browbeaten into doing it now. So let's talk a little bit about Drakkars. Oh, the famous warship of the Vikings. The very arrival of Drakkar sent people quacking in their shoes from fear. Not for nothing, a monk in what is now Normandy wrote in the back of their Bible on the vellum, "From the fury of the Norse, O Lord, save us," or protect us, whichever word you prefer. I'm sure it will be an accurate translation, since the initial script was written in Latin, I believe. I already spoke about the fact that we were initially informed by the great discoveries of the OSEBERG ship burial and the Jokstad ship burials. Their stories are too well known to really make it necessary to repeat and retell them. They have also been beautifully published. The Jokstad publication is particularly impressive because the original publication is bilingual. It is in obviously Norwegian, but it is also in English, and to sweeten the pill even further, it is freely available online as a PDF and photographic also version of that publication. It is very interesting. It is very well worth reading it, and it gives us a detailed knowledge of the Jokstad. If anyone ever decides to build a model of the Jokstad ship, you have to find this publication, because it is showing all the findings, the original drawings, all of them to scale, at a time when illustrators actually had to be good artists and to be capable of drawing. Not, as nowadays has become fashionable, spilling paint on canvas to be considered art, or squashing a piece of paper, declaring it a modern art, and selling it for incredible amounts of money. No, in the past, and archaeological illustrators to the present day actually have to have at least some technical skill. Returning to the vessels. It was indeed the Skuldelev that showed us that within the same tradition, within the same style of double-enders, clinker-built double-enders, with powered by single square sail, there actually are variations, and you can produce different types of vessels, not only by size, but by shape and by purpose. I mentioned that one of the vessels that proved to be a challenge initially to interpret was initially believed to be two separate vessels, Skuldelev II and Skuldelev IV. Subsequently, the two vessels were found out to be one and the same vessel. It simply was so much bigger than the others, and because it was made out of softwood, it was in far less good state of preservation. So it was separated into two separate pieces, broken over the other wrecks. But as the archaeologists from what became the Viking Museum in Roskilde, one of the most wonderful institutions in the world of this time, as they were studying the remnants, they came to the conclusion that this is one and the same vessel. Lo and behold, we had our Drakkar. The Drakkar versus the other vessels, it differs in size, first and foremost. It is much more substantial vessel, it is deeper vessel, it is longer vessel, it has great elongation. The beam to length ratio is quite significant. It is mostly a rowing vessel, but of course could be propelled by the square sail. And it is pierced for 60 rowers, which, funnily enough, is the actual registered in historical record size of a Viking crew or a Viking war band. In other words, one crew, one war band. In this, Patrick Cornwall, in his saga about Utrecht Babembra, is quite right in describing one crew as one unit. He has done his homework on this one. The reconstruction, of course, was carried out, and Roskilde follows a model that really has become, it is the groundbreaking, the way reconstruction was done around the world. At the same time when the Roskilde wrecks were being studied, actually Skuldelev wrecks, because there is a separate group of medieval vessels that were excavated in the location where the museum was eventually built, and properly they are known as the Roskilde ships. So, it may be best known approach, but they were not the first one to do it, of course. Professor Frederick van Dorning, probably the foremost maritime Byzantologist in the world to the present day, who was the first one to attempt to reconstruct a wreck from very, very fragmentary evidence found on the bottom, namely the Yasa, 7th century Byzantine ship. But in the Roskilde version, basically the model depends on very accurate documentation of each fragment of timber. That is subsequently reduced photographically. We're talking about pre-computer documentation. They were reduced photographically, usually to a scale of 1 to 10. Then the site plan was printed out. Cutouts were produced of each of these timbers. They were glued at first to cardboard, subsequently to either thin planks or pretty much what shipmodelers do, or even sometimes to plywood. Then they are cut out. The recorded bevels, angles, fasteners, all of them are marked and drilled in their proper documented space. And then you have on your hands a three-dimensional puzzle. Imagine, however, a puzzle in which the sweet kids have managed to lose about 70–80% of the pieces. And from what is left, you have to reconstruct what was the picture on the puzzle. Enjoy. As a matter of fact, me being a masochist, I do enjoy exactly this. This is what brought me to maritime archaeology in the first place. I absolutely love this sort of work. And it is very interesting, it is very rewarding process. But this is the process through which the vessel's shape is reconstructed. You have some of the timbers, you're trying to match the angles, you're trying to match the fasteners to meet each other. And this gives you just enough control points from which you can reconstruct the rest of the vessel. Sometimes it is easier to do it, sometimes it is next to impossible to completely do it. It really depends on how much and what key points of the house structure are surviving. And that was the process used in the reconstruction of Skuldelev 2-4, just as it was with all the other Skuldelev vessels. As I said, the museum also fairly early on started, after modeling, after building three-dimensional models, critiquing them, studying them, analyzing them, redocumenting them, carrying out extensive critiques of this work, approached very carefully the question of building full-scale replicas to see what we can learn from these full-scale replicas. They are probably the only vessels in the world that deserve the title of replica. If you check your Oxford Dictionary of the English language, you will see that replica means essentially an exact copy. And in the case of the Skuldelev vessels, that's exactly what the Danes did. They really, really went all out on this one. These vessels, the timbers were found in the forest and were cut in traditional methods. The timbers were transported to the shipyard. They were split in the traditional way. No sawing, no modern technology was used in the conversion of the timber into the planking and into the ship parts. Colleagues from Roskilde Museum actually made replicas of the tools found in medieval burials, in the bogs from the 19th through the 20th century. So even the tools that they used were traditional medieval. The master shipwright once told me in a conversation that they cannot guarantee that this is how these ships were built, but they can guarantee that the technology and tools that are used in the construction of the replicas was definitely available and used by the medieval shipwrights of the Viking period. And that to me is the major difference. Not only that, but even every single one of the nails that went into holding the planks together was created by a blacksmith following only traditional methods of construction. There are no epoxies, there are no modern tools, there are no power saws, there are no power planes, nothing like this was used. Only medieval tools, medieval methods, medieval material, exactly the same way that the original ships were constructed. And I'm not aware of any other replica that really fully matches this standard. To some extent, the Australian replica of Endeavour is close to it, but she does have an engine. To some extent, Duyfken, also constructed in Australia, early 17th century Dutch yacht. She was built following traditional methods, but even they used modern tools also. The Roskilde folks did not use any modern tools. My hat off to them. Their work, that is why their work is actually historically valuable, because these replicas would behave at sea exactly the same way that the original vessel would have been behaving. And that is important because this is the only thing that can teach us how these vessels really behave. And this is what we can learn from them. By now they are building replica number 3, the second version of Skuldelev 3, because the old one is more than 25 years old, and actually by itself is already an archaeological site that we can study to see how, with this usage over the years, this vessel has worn out, and to see how the repairs needed on this vessel match the repairs that were needed on the original vessel and that were documented. So returning to the Drakkar of the vessel, Skuldelev 2-4. This was the last of the replicas, the original group of replicas built. It was constructed in the early 2000s. And another interesting detail about it is that the original ship was built around Dublin in Ireland, which, as we know, was a Viking kingdom at the time. We know this because dendrochronology identified the sources of the timbers and demonstrated that they grew up at the end of the 10th, beginning of the 11th century in Ireland. The vessel very likely was operational in 1060s, which of course connects us with another interesting episode of local history that may or may not be subject for this conversation. The interesting part, of course, was that in the best traditions of PC, once the vessel was constructed and tested, it was suggested that she should sail across the North Sea and go visit Ireland as a gesture of goodwill, etc., etc., etc. Ambassador, you fill in the blanks. Brilliant plan. The vessel was equipped. It was supposed to be sailing in company with a modern tug, just in case it gets in trouble, to be safe. Sure enough, it did get in trouble. A severe storm hit the North Sea. Very severe storm. Such a storm that the tugboat told them that its parting company cannot stay out at sea and will go look for shelter in a port. Asked whether to tow the Viking ship. But the captain of the Viking ship came to the conclusion that actually they're risking a lot more by being towed in this sort of seas and storm and trying to enter a port. So he said, "No, we'll just brazen it out at sea." They lay to. And, I love this part. In the competition between medieval technology and modern 21st century technology, guess which one won? The medieval technology, hands down. It was an uncomfortable night. They were cold, they were wet, they were miserable, but they were fine. As the storm abated, put the oars out, set the sail, continued the voyage. Not so the tugboat that was supposed to secure them. That ship had suffered significant damage in the storm and needed repairs before it could continue its voyage. I rest my case. I think that this has demonstrated conclusively that the Vikings did know what they were doing and how they were building ships, and that properly handled, their vessels were perfectly capable of all the voyages that are assigned to them. I will conclude this conversation by bragging that I had the very, very good fortune years ago to sail on two of the vessels, briefly unfortunately, on Skuldelev 5, the smaller warship, and on one which was the Nar. And Skuldelev 5 is essentially a longship. Bigger than this one, but this is the overall shape. Not nearly as big as a Drakkar, but it is a vessel that is long, narrow, with deep keel. These are all the characteristics that produce a directionally stable vessel. In other words, she would track well, absolutely no question about it. Tacking her, however, ought to be a significant problem, especially when you're sailing her with one single square sail. The poor captain and crew of the boat were loaded with a bunch of useless archaeologists. One who shall remain nameless, well, he's deceased now, unfortunately, who had spent half of his life writing about oars and how oaring systems worked, but when he was faced with a real oar, he actually didn't know which was the working end and which was the other end. So the captain eventually asked him to stop rowing. The real point, however, is that once the sail was set, I had the opportunity to time attack of the vessel. And it took 50 seconds. That is from the moment when the command helm Zali was given to the point where the crew and I were coiling the lines after the completed maneuver. You would say this is slow. Yes, if this is America's Cup boat, it certainly is slow. But we were beating out of the fjord together with a modern cruising sailboat. And the Viking ship outperformed the modern boat hands down. By Beneteau. The same was true for the Nar, actually, but you know, she's fuller bodied, she's shorter, less surprise there. What is truly surprising is that how close to the wind these vessels sailed. I was impressed. Clearly, that was clearly written on my face because the captain smiled politely, looked at me and said, "But sir, we took so long, full 50 seconds, only because we had all these untrained guests aboard. If it was just us, the crew, we would have done it in less than half this time." The voyage was over. I picked up my jaw somewhere down from the bilges of the ship, and I was left with this wonderful experience of having sailed on a true medieval Viking ship, a type of vessel that the Vikings themselves would have recognized and would have known how to operate. So if you ever get a chance, by all means, if there is one place that you can visit in Denmark, go visit Roskilde. Thank you ever so much for watching. Thank you so much for commenting, liking, or disliking, as the case may be, and I hope to see you soon again. Goodbye. They went further than this. They actually made replicas. Yes, what would I do without him to show me the script of what I'm supposed to be talking, right, Imbir? Thank you for your help. Returning to what I was talking about. You see, the